He thought he was taking his old father to an orphanage to leave him there. Then he saw a photograph on the wall. It was his father, 30 years younger, standing beside a little boy. The description underneath the photograph made his heart stop. Because the little boy in that picture was him. My name is Ethan Miller. I was 34 years old when I made the biggest mistake of my life. At the time, I didn't think it was a mistake. I thought I was finally fixing a problem that had been ruining my marriage. My father, Robert, was 72. He had lived with my wife, Sarah, and me for almost 2 years. At first, everything was fine. My father was quiet. He never complained. He helped around the house. He would wake up early, make coffee, and sit near the window reading the newspaper. But after Sarah and I had our first child, things started changing. Sarah didn't like having my father around anymore. She said he needed too much attention. She said the house wasn't big enough. She said we needed privacy. I kept telling her that he was my father. He had nowhere else to go. My mother had passed away many years earlier. My father had spent his whole life taking care of me. But Sarah kept saying the same thing. You need to choose, Ethan. I didn't want to choose. But slowly, her words started getting into my head. My father was getting older. He needed help with small things. Sometimes he forgot where he had put his glasses. Sometimes he asked the same question twice. And sometimes he would sit quietly at the dinner table while Sarah and I argued. I started feeling embarrassed. I started thinking that maybe Sarah was right. Maybe my father would be better somewhere else. One Saturday morning, Sarah showed me a place about 40 minutes outside town. It was called Hope Haven. It had originally been an orphanage many years ago. Now it was a large care center for elderly people who had nowhere else to go. The place was surrounded by trees. There was an old brick building in the middle. Sarah told me it was perfect. He'll have people his age around him. He won't be alone. And we can finally have our own life. I didn't answer. But 2 days later, I packed my father's clothes into 2 bags. He watched me from his chair. Where are we going? I looked away. I found you a nice place. He was quiet. Then he asked, Are you taking me there? I nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't get angry. He simply looked down at his hands. Okay, son. Those 2 words should have stopped me. But they didn't. The next morning, I drove him to Hope Haven. He sat quietly in the passenger seat. For most of the drive, neither of us spoke. I kept looking at the road. My father looked out the window. After about 30 minutes, he finally said, You know, Ethan, I've been here before. I glanced at him. Here. Not this building. He smiled faintly. This land. I didn't ask what he meant. I was too uncomfortable. When we arrived, a woman named Linda came outside to meet us. She was around 60 and worked at the center. She smiled when she saw my father. But the moment she looked at him, her expression changed. She stared at him for several seconds. Then she whispered, Robert. My father smiled. Hello, Linda. I looked at both of them. You know my father? Linda looked surprised. Of course I do. My father gave her a small smile. It's been a long time. Linda hugged him. I stood there confused. How could she know my father? He had never mentioned this place to me. Linda helped him carry his bags inside. The building was much larger than I expected. There were elderly residents sitting in a common room. Some were watching television. Others were playing cards. There were old photographs covering the walls. I didn't pay much attention to them. I just wanted to leave. I gave Linda the paperwork. Then I turned toward my father. I'll come back this weekend. He nodded. Take care of your family, son. I felt a strange feeling in my chest. I ignored it. Just as I was about to walk away, my phone rang. It was Sarah. I answered. Hey. Her voice was cold. Did you leave him? Yes. Good. I looked at my father. He was standing near the reception desk. Sarah continued. Ethan, I want you to understand something. What? Tell your father that he should never show his face at our house again. I didn't say anything. She continued. I'm serious. I don't want him coming back. Then she hung up. I lowered my phone. I looked at my father. He was no longer looking at me. He was standing beside Linda and 2 other workers. And strangely, he was laughing. Really laughing. I hadn't seen my father laugh like that in years. The workers were smiling too. One of them put a hand on his shoulder. My father looked completely comfortable. Like he had come home. I walked back inside. I looked at Linda. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you know my father? She looked at Robert. Then back at me. You really don't know? Know what? She hesitated. Before she could answer, I noticed something on the wall behind her. There were dozens of old photographs. Pictures of children, families, volunteers, people who had worked at Hope Haven over the years. I walked closer. One photograph caught my attention. A young man was standing in front of the building. He was holding the hand of a little boy. I stopped. The young man looked familiar. Very familiar. I stepped closer. My heart began beating faster. It was my father, but he looked about 30 years younger. I stared at the little boy beside him. The boy had dark hair, a small blue jacket, and a nervous smile. I felt something strange. I had seen that face before. Not in a photograph. In the mirror. I looked underneath the picture. There was a small description. I read it once. Then again. Robert Miller, 1992. Volunteer and foster parent. Robert took a young boy from Hope Haven into his home and later adopted him. My hand started shaking. I looked at the photograph again. The little boy was wearing the same blue jacket I remembered from one of my earliest childhood photographs. I looked at Linda. Who is that boy? Linda stared at me. Her eyes slowly filled with tears. Then she said, Ethan. I couldn't breathe. That boy is you. I stared at Linda. What did you say? She looked at the photograph again. That little boy is you. I shook my head. No, that's not possible. Linda walked closer to the photograph. Your father brought you here when you were 4 years old. I looked at my father. He was standing across the room, talking quietly with another worker. He hadn't noticed us yet. I lowered my voice. My father never told me I was adopted. Linda looked at me sadly. Because he wanted you to believe you were his son. I couldn't understand. Why would he do that? Linda pointed toward another photograph. Come with me. She walked down the hallway. I followed her. The walls were covered with old photographs. Children standing beside families. Christmas celebrations. Birthday parties. School events. Then she stopped in front of another picture. It showed my father sitting in a small chair. I was sitting on his lap. I looked about 5 years old. My father was smiling at me. Underneath the photograph were several words. Robert and Ethan, Christmas 1993. I stared at it. I don't remember this. You were very young, Linda said. She continued walking. Your father came here every week before he adopted you. Why? He was a volunteer. I looked at her. He worked here. Yes. She told me that my father had lost his wife a few years earlier. He had no children. He spent most of his time working and coming home to an empty house. Then one day, he started volunteering at Hope Haven. That's where he met me. I was 4 years old. I didn't talk much. I didn't trust people. And according to Linda, I spent most of my time sitting alone. Your father noticed you immediately. I looked at the photograph again. What happened? Linda smiled. He started bringing you small things. What things? Books. Toy cars. Candy. I laughed softly. That sounds like him. Linda nodded. He never tried to force you to talk. He just sat beside you. Every Saturday. I looked down. How long? Months. Then Linda told me something I had never heard before. One winter afternoon, I got sick. I had a high fever. The staff called my father. He came immediately. He stayed beside me all night. The next morning, he told Linda, I don't want him growing up here. Linda asked him what he meant. He said, I want to be his father. I looked away. My eyes were filling with tears. He adopted me? Linda nodded. He went through everything legally. And then, he brought you home. I looked at the photograph again. The young version of my father was smiling. I had spent my entire life believing that he had simply been my father. I never questioned it. I never asked where I had been born. I never asked about my mother. Whenever I asked about my childhood, he would just say, You were always my little boy. I thought it was just something fathers said. Now I understood. He had meant it. Linda touched my shoulder. There is something else. I looked at her. What? Your father didn't just adopt you. She paused. He refused to let anyone tell you that you were different. I didn't understand. He wanted you to have a normal childhood. He wanted you to feel wanted. I looked across the room. My father was still talking to the workers. He looked happy. I suddenly remembered something from my childhood. When I was about 8, I once asked him why I didn't have any baby pictures. He had laughed and said, Because you were too busy keeping me awake. I had laughed. I never asked again. Now I wondered if he had been hiding the truth behind that joke. Linda walked toward another wall. There was a large frame with several newspaper articles. One article caught my attention. I stepped closer. The headline read, "Local man opens his home to foster child." The date was 1992. I read the article. It described my father. It said he had worked 2 jobs to support the child he had recently taken in. It said he had refused financial help from the center. The article quoted him saying, "He doesn't need to know that I rescued him. He just needs to know that I love him." I couldn't read anymore. I wiped my eyes. Linda looked at me. "Your father never wanted praise. Then why is this here?" "He didn't put it there." I looked at her. "Who did?" "The center." I turned back toward my father. He had finally noticed me. He smiled. "Ready to go, son?" I couldn't answer. He walked toward me. "Are you okay?" I looked at his face. The same face I had seen every morning of my life. The same hands that had held mine when I was a child. The same man I had just left behind because my wife didn't want him in our house. And suddenly I felt ashamed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" His smile disappeared. He knew exactly what I meant. He looked at Linda. She quietly walked away. My father sat down. I sat beside him. After a few seconds, he said, "I wanted to." "Then why didn't you?" He looked at his hands. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of me?" "No." He looked at me. "I was afraid you would think I wasn't your real father." I felt tears run down my face. "You are my real father." He smiled sadly. "That's all I ever wanted you to believe." I couldn't speak. He continued, "When you were little, I had already decided." "Decided what?" "That you would never feel unwanted." He told me that when he adopted me, the lawyers had explained that I might eventually ask questions about my biological parents. But he didn't care. He wasn't trying to erase my past. He simply wanted to give me a future. "I didn't know who your birth parents were," he said. "But I knew one thing." "What?" "I was going to love you enough that you would never have to wonder if you belonged somewhere." I covered my face. My father reached over and touched my shoulder. "Son, don't cry." I laughed through my tears. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For leaving you here." He shook his head. "You didn't leave me." I looked at him. "You brought me here." He smiled. "And maybe that's where you needed to bring me." I couldn't understand what he meant. Then he looked toward the old photographs. "This place gave me the greatest gift of my life." He pointed at me. "You." I broke down. I hugged him. He held me tightly. For the first time in years, I felt like a little boy again. Safe. Loved. Wanted. Then my phone rang. It was Sarah. I looked at the screen. My father saw her name. "You should answer." I didn't want to. But I did. "Hello." Sarah sounded angry. "Why are you still there?" I looked at my father. "I found out something." "What?" "My father adopted me." She became silent. "What are you talking about?" I looked at the photograph on the wall. "I was raised by the man you just told me never to bring home." Sarah didn't answer. I continued. "He didn't abandon me. He found me. He chose me." Then I heard her voice. "But Ethan," I interrupted her. "No." For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I wanted. "I'm bringing my father home." I ended the call. My father looked at me. "You don't have to do that because you feel guilty." "I know." "Then why?" I looked at him. "Because you're my father." He smiled. But before we could leave, Linda came running toward us. She was holding an old file. "Ethan." I turned around. "What?" She looked nervous. "There is something in your father's adoption file that you need to see." I opened the file. The first page was an old document from 1992. At the bottom was my father's signature. But above his signature was another name. My birth mother's name. I stared at it. I had never heard that name before. And underneath it was a sentence that made my heart stop. "Mother voluntarily surrendered the child for adoption." I looked at Linda. "Who was my mother?" She slowly closed the file. "That's the part your father never told you." I looked at Linda. "What do you mean he never told me?" She held the file against her chest. "I don't think he wanted you to know." I looked at my father. He was still sitting near the window. He seemed to know exactly what we were talking about. I walked over to him. "Dad." He looked up. "Yes, son?" "Who was my mother?" His face changed. For the first time that day, I saw fear in his eyes. He looked at Linda. Then back at me. "I thought we were going home." "We are. But I need to know." He looked down. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered. "Her name was Emily." I had never heard that name before. "Where is she?" My father took a deep breath. "She died when you were very young." "How?" "She was sick." What kind of sick? He didn't answer. I sat beside him. Dad, please. He closed his eyes. Your mother had a serious illness. She knew she couldn't take care of you. That's why she gave me permission to adopt you. I looked at him. Did you know her? Yes. Did she know you were going to adopt me? Yes. I couldn't understand. Then why did everyone make it sound like I had no family? My father looked at me. Because your mother wanted you to have a chance at a normal life. He told me that Emily had grown up in a difficult home. She had very little money. When I was born, she was already sick. She was afraid she wouldn't live long enough to raise me. She had heard about Hope Haven through a social worker. That's where she met my father. She asked me to promise her something, he said. What? That you would never grow up thinking she abandoned you. I looked at him. But I did think that. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Because she asked me not to. I was stunned. Why? My father looked toward the old photographs. She wanted you to remember that you were loved. He told me that Emily had written me a letter before she died. But she didn't want me to read it as a child. She wanted me to read it when I was old enough to understand. Where is it? My father didn't answer. I stood up. Dad, where is the letter? He looked at me. It's at home. My heart raced. You have it? He nodded. I've had it for 30 years. I couldn't believe it. We left Hope Haven together. On the drive home, my father barely spoke. Neither did I. I kept thinking about the woman who had given birth to me. A woman I had never seen. A woman who had apparently loved me enough to give me to someone who could care for me. When we reached home, my father walked slowly toward his room. He opened an old wooden drawer. From the bottom, he pulled out a small envelope. It was worn and faded. My name was written on it. Ethan. My hand started shaking. Why didn't you ever give this to me? He looked at me. Because I was afraid. Of what? That you would read it and decide I wasn't enough. I hugged him. You were always enough. He smiled. Then he handed me the letter. I sat at the kitchen table. My father sat across from me. I opened the envelope. The handwriting was delicate. The first line said, Dear Ethan, if you are reading this, then you are old enough to know why I made the hardest decision of my life. I stopped. My eyes filled with tears. I continued. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I didn't give you away because I didn't want you. I gave you a father because I wanted you to have a life I could no longer give you. I looked at my father. He was crying quietly. The letter continued. Robert is a good man. He will tell you that I asked him to take you. He will probably tell you that he was only doing what I asked. Don't believe him. I looked at my father. He smiled through his tears. The letter continued. He didn't have to take you. He chose you. I stopped reading. Those words hit me harder than anything else. My father had chosen me. Not because he had to. Not because someone forced him. He chose me. The letter continued. One day, you may wonder why I wasn't there. Please don't spend your life looking for someone to blame. I was sick. I was afraid. And I knew I couldn't give you the childhood you deserved. Then came the sentence that broke my heart. But I knew Robert could. I couldn't see the page clearly anymore. My tears were falling onto the paper. Then I read the final paragraph. Your father may not share your blood. But blood is not what makes a family. Love is. If he has kept you safe, held you when you were scared, worked so you could have a better life, and loved you when you didn't know how to love yourself, then you have been blessed with a father. I looked at Robert. He was crying. I reached across the table and held his hand. I was so wrong. He squeezed my hand. You were young. I'm 34. He smiled. You're still my little boy. I laughed through my tears. Then I remembered something. Sarah. I looked at my phone. I had several missed calls. I didn't answer. Instead, I called her later that evening. She picked up immediately. Ethan, where are you? At home. Did you bring him back? Yes. She became silent. Why? Because he is my father. But I told you. I know what you told me. I took a breath. And I finally understand something. What? I spent years thinking my father was the man who gave me life. But that's not true. The man who gave me life was my mother. The man who gave me a home was Robert. Sarah didn't respond. I continued. He worked 2 jobs when I was a kid. He stayed awake when I was sick. He went to every parent meeting. He taught me how to ride a bike. He sat beside me when I failed my driving test. He was there every time I needed someone. And I almost left him because you told me he was a problem. Sarah began crying. I didn't know. I know. But Ethan, I can't do this anymore. What do you mean? I won't choose between my wife and my father. There was silence. I hope you understand. I ended the call. That night, my father and I sat on the porch. For the first time, I asked him about my mother. He told me everything he remembered. He told me she was kind. She loved music. She used to sing while cooking. She wanted me to grow up to be a good man. And before she died, she asked him to promise that he would never let me feel unwanted. He kept that promise. For 34 years. And I had almost broken it in one afternoon. The next morning, I went back to Hope Haven. I stood in front of the old photograph. The photograph of my father holding my hand. I looked at the little boy in the picture. Then I smiled. I finally understood why my father had laughed when he returned to that place. It wasn't just an old building. It was the place where his life changed. The place where he found me. The place where I became his son. But there was one more thing I didn't know. As I stood there looking at the photograph, Linda walked up beside me. She said, "Ethan, your father left something else here." I turned around. "What?" She smiled. "Something he asked us to keep for you." She handed me a small wooden box. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of me as a child. And beside it was a note. Only one sentence was written on it. "I hope my son never has to wonder if he was loved." I couldn't hold back my tears. Because now I knew. He had loved me. Not because he was my biological father. Not because he had to. But because 34 years ago he walked into an orphanage. Saw a little boy sitting alone. And chose him. I held the little wooden box in my hands and stared at the note. "I hope my son never has to wonder if he was loved." I read it again. Then I looked at the old photograph. There I was. A little boy sitting beside Robert. The man I had nearly abandoned. The man who had never once made me feel like I wasn't his. I walked back to my father. He was sitting outside under the same tree where I had left him a few days earlier. I sat beside him. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "Dad, I'm sorry." He looked at me. "For what?" "For bringing you here." He smiled. "You didn't know." "I should have." "Maybe." He looked toward the trees. "But sometimes people don't understand what they have until they're about to lose it." I lowered my head. "Did you hate me?" He looked surprised. "Never. Not even for 1 second?" He shook his head. "You were angry. You were confused. But you were never someone I could hate." I felt tears in my eyes. Then he reached into his pocket. He pulled out an old photograph. It was the same picture I had seen on the wall. But this one was smaller. He handed it to me. "I kept this with me for 30 years. I looked at it. On the back was a date. November 18th, 1992. The day he first brought me home. I looked at him. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" He smiled. "Because I wanted the story of your life to begin with us." I didn't know what to say. He continued. "I didn't want you growing up thinking you were someone I rescued. I wanted you to think you were my son. You were. You are." I hugged him. This time, he hugged me back without saying anything. A few days later, I made a decision. I brought my father home. Not because I felt guilty. Not because I felt sorry for him. I brought him home because he belonged there. I moved his things into the room next to mine. The same room I had once thought was too small for him. That evening, I cooked dinner. My father sat at the kitchen table. He looked around the house. Then he smiled. "You know what?" "What?" "This feels familiar." I laughed. "It should." He looked at me. "Why?" "Because this is your home." He didn't say anything. He just smiled. A few weeks passed. Life slowly became normal again. My father helped me with the garden. He read stories to my son. He taught him how to play checkers. Sometimes I would find them sitting together on the porch. My father would tell him stories about when I was young. And my son would laugh. One evening, I asked my father, "Do you ever wish you had told me the truth earlier?" He thought for a moment. "Sometimes." "Then why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid that if I told you I wasn't your biological father, you would start looking for the man who was." I looked at him. "Did you ever want me to find him?" He smiled. "No." "Why?" "Because I already had you." I laughed. "You were sure of that?" "Every day." That answer stayed with me. Months later, I went back to Hope Haven. The center was holding a small anniversary celebration. I walked through the hallway where I had first seen my father's photograph. The picture was still there. But this time, something had changed. There was a new photograph beside it. It showed me and my father standing together. Underneath, it was a simple description. Robert Miller and his son, Ethan. I smiled. A young boy was standing nearby, looking at the pictures. He asked me, "Is that your dad?" I looked at the photograph. "Yes. He looks nice." "He is." The boy smiled and walked away. I stood there for a moment. Then Linda came beside me. "You know, your father still talks about you." I laughed. "What does he say?" "He says you're stubborn." I laughed. "That's true. And he says you were always worth waiting for." I looked away because my eyes were filling with tears. Before leaving, I walked outside. My father was waiting in the car. I opened the door. "Ready?" He smiled. "Always." As we drove home, I thought about the day I had brought him there. I had believed I was leaving behind a burden. I didn't realize I was standing in the very place where that man had once found me. I didn't realize the workers knew my father. I didn't know his photograph was on the wall. And I certainly didn't know that the little boy in that photograph was me. That day changed everything. It taught me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes family is the person who stays when everyone else leaves. The person who gives you their time when they have nothing else to give. The person who chooses you without being asked. Robert didn't have to become my father. He chose to. And for 34 years, he never once made me feel like I was anything less than his own son. I still think about the phone call from Sarah sometimes. The words she said that day hurt. But if she had never said them, I might never have looked back. I might never have asked why my father was so comfortable at Hope Haven. I might never have seen that photograph. I might never have learned the truth. And I might never have realized just how much my father had sacrificed for me. A year later, my father and I returned to Hope Haven together. We stood in front of the old photograph. He looked at the little boy in it. Then he smiled. "Look at you." I laughed. "I was tiny. You were trouble." I looked at him. "And you still chose me." He nodded. "I would choose you again." I hugged him. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about the past. I felt grateful. Because I had spent years thinking I had been given a father by birth. But the truth was much more beautiful. I had been given a father by choice. And sometimes the person who chooses to love you is the person who becomes your family in every way that truly matters.